So I shared this picture last week as a bit of a teaser, and this video explains what happened, what the diagnosis process would be, and also what the issue actually turned out to be. The wall is in my house, so I had all the bits of information that I needed right at the beginning, but the purpose of this is about making use of the information that you do have and thinking about the questions that you could and should ask. Sometimes we're going to be in situations where we really don't know and we don't have the opportunity to ask those questions. Whether that's because you're doing it as a home buyer survey and you don't have any contact with the vendor. It could be a damp and mould survey where things have changed since this first happened, or it could be a tenanted property where you may have or should have the tenant available to answer some of those questions, but you do need to ask the right questions in the first place. So the responses that I got straight away, just guesses as what could have caused this. They're really, really good guesses. None of them are wrong in the sense that they were all the right kind of things to be looking at. And specifically what mainly the surveyors who'd answered this question had looked at is why it was in this shape, which is the most important question to ask, and there's lots of reasons why you have mould or dampness in particular shapes and sizes. Everyone could see straight away that although there's this unit in front, the patch of mould doesn't match the shape and size of the unit, so everyone had quite rightly ruled out that the cabinet itself had caused the issue. We had guesses such as patches of Carlite plaster or bonding plaster, which is really common for being a different material that might absorb more moisture than the areas around it. We had a guess of whether on the other side of this wall there was a tumble dryer that was venting. I did provide the information that there was a WC and shower room behind this wall, which could be critical, and I shared a photo of that room so you could see that the boxing behind the cistern was nearly this shape. It's not quite, and a lot of the surveyors quite rightly had said, you know, it'd be useful to know the dimensions. We also had guesses about insulation being missed behind this area and perhaps cold air coming up from a subfloor void, which is a really good guess. And then we had one guess which was also exactly right. But if I just go through so we can see exactly what happened. So this is the area in question, this is the cabinet. The only reason I really noticed it was because there was just this little bit of staining just kind of prodding out from there. The cabinet itself was originally around about here. So when I've pulled it forward, there's a bit of missing information that I'm going to give you in a second, but this is roughly what it was like. So what we can see is it was really localised. The mould's been treated, but the wallpaper's kind of damaged beyond repair, so we're going to have to re-wallpaper here anyway. But it was just this area, kind of starting here, then up to there. The cabinet you can see is all the way there, and it's not this bit here, it's not water damage, that's actually just where a box is in there and has kind of pushed it out, and then everything else is just dust. So there was a really obvious thing that kind of came up, but I just want to show you why I kind of still looked in the same direction as what other people have done. The other side of this wall, we've got a WC and shower room, and I'm going to show you what I found when I looked in here. It was nothing that was actually a cause, but I'll show you anyway. So we've got this one open. I'm going to explain why in a minute. I didn't think that there was an issue here, but I thought it's just a little bit maybe too coincidental to not at least check it out, just in case it was a secondary issue to the one that I'd found already. But what I'm going to do is, it's difficult to kind of see in there as it is, but I've got a little scope that we can pop in there, and if I can just, we can actually get right down into the bottom. It's a bit of an awkward angle, but actually you can see all the way around there. It's pretty dry, so it's actually been tiled on this wall, but we can see there's no water on the floor and there's no sign of any leak. There's no dampness right at the bottom of the back of that board. So even though it is nearly in a corresponding area, it's not corresponding to the shape actually, and also it's dry. So it's just to show that absolutely it's always worth carrying out other investigations to see if there's a reason that wall might be a little bit cooler. But what I'm going to show you is the missing bit of information, and the only point of highlighting this is to say that if you do jump into conclusions and say it must be this, it must be something else, only focus on let's rule out a leak. the reason why this happened. And if I put it back exactly as it was when I first spotted it, there was this bit of faux ring ply that had been slid in behind, just to put it out of the way. And that's exactly what it was like. And when I pulled it away, there was condensation on the back of this. So this is quite a moisture resistant bit of material, but it was just trapping a little bit of air, moist air, against that wall that otherwise isn't defective. And interestingly, I did have this home monitored for quite a long time, and it was coming up quite regularly with a high risk of damp and mould, especially in this area where we've got an unheated kitchen extension with no door. So I almost dismissed it as I recognise there's a risk, but there's not actually anything happening. But what you can see is that it only takes one bit of imbalance in one particular area, and that's where you might get problems. So obviously not having something against this wall and just allowing even just a small gap when it's an internal wall. But you know, if I had something against external walls, that's the kind of places where I'd start to get problems, even if there's no wall defect. So hopefully that was interesting. And it just goes to show it is really important, especially when you're going into homes where you don't have all that information. You might forget to ask that question, what was there before? Because we can see that this cabinet's here, but there was a whole other thing that you might not think to ask, and actually the people that live in the homes might have the key and be able to answer the question, yeah, we had this board here before, and that's when we discovered it. And I think, like many, I've seen this enough that my first guess would probably be that this is condensation related mould, but absolutely it's completely appropriate to consider whether there's other reasons why this surface might be slightly cooler than it should be. For example, whether there's a second leak that maybe isn't enough to show as a leak, but is introducing enough moisture to make the wall cooler than it needs to be. But just for anyone who's not aware of it and is in an early stage of their career or isn't in a technical role but needs to know a little bit about these common signs, here are some other examples of the kind of thing that we see very often. Sometimes the item of furniture is still there, but sometimes it's not, or it's been moved, but there's quite often signs. And as an example, just seeing the footprint of furniture, like you can see in the photos on the right hand side, the 3 photos, you can actually still see the footprint and you can see exactly where the item of furniture was. And when you're looking at external defects, and there may well be some external defects, it's important to think, okay, if you've got leaking guttering that's leaking all the way along, or poor condition pointing or render, what are the chances, what's the balance of probability that the mould is growing in the exact shape and size of the item of furniture if there's external defects that are in a slightly different area, especially if you've got a cavity wall. You've got to think about what's the possibility of an external defect or several external defects that would be needed to allow water to pass through an internal cavity wall versus the probability that mould forms behind furniture where we know that it will be cooler and have a less flow of air. So hopefully that's useful. I found it quite interesting and lesson learned from me about considering where things are and making sure that I'm not increasing the risk of condensation and mould forming.